He growled in the middle of a federal courtroom, low, deliberate, eyes locked on a man no one expected, the entire gallery frozen as a military trainine refused to sit in the presence of his enemy. No one moved, no one breathed, and in that precise moment, without needing a single word, the dog exposed a conspiracy so deeply rooted it nearly erased the man who raised it. It starts long before that, in a place no camera ever reached to fit. Inside the silent loyalty of a German shepherd named Luke. He wasn't bred for attention. He wasn't trained for applause. He was born for duty, forged in trust, and when the world betrayed his partner, he remembered everything, every command, every lie. This isn't just a story about justice. It's a story about a dog who never forgot, even when the world wanted him to. If this pulled you in, stick around. This series will unravel secrets layer by layer, and Luke is at the heart of all of it. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment which part caught you off guard, and where are you watching from? Let's hear your theories because trust me, it only gets deeper from here. Michael Carter had always believed silence was sacred. That belief crumbled the moment the jury foreman spoke the word guilty. The air in the courtroom didn't move, but something inside him shattered. Not the disbelief of being accused. He had expected the trap to close, just not so quickly. But it was the weight of those 6 letters said out loud that sunk into his chest like lead. In that moment, time fractured. The low murmur of the courtroom, the scribbling pens, the flicker of camera flashes outside the tall windows. It all blurred. His hands were already in cuffs. He didn't resist. He just looked back once, one last time, toward the corner of the courtroom. Luke, his canine partner, sat quietly, ears perked, tail unmoving. His amber eyes locked with Michael's, and the unspoken language they had spent years perfecting passed between them. I don't understand. 15 years of service, countless missions, a spotless record, and now this. Framed, betrayed, and all he could do was nod as if to say goodbye. Except, he didn't. Not really. Because inside him, beneath the numbness, something still burned. Not vengeance, not despair, something older, deeper. A need to be understood. A need for one being in this world to know the truth. They escorted him out without ceremony. The press didn't even need to shove. The guards dragged him through the throng like a trophy. Traitor cop, the headline screamed the next morning, flanked by grainy photos of him exiting the courthouse with downcast eyes. But what no one saw was the small flicker of movement behind the tinted van window. Luke, seated in the back with his new handler, watched until the van disappeared from view. He didn't bark. He didn't move. But his ears twitched as if tuning to something no human could hear. Weeks passed. The world moved on. Michael sat in a sterile cell with dull concrete walls and a ticking fluorescent light that buzzed louder at night. He didn't sleep much. Not because of fear, but because every time he closed his eyes, he could see the moment again. Luke staring back at him, confused but loyal. That stare haunted him more than the conviction. His lawyer came once a week. She was young, idealistic, but in over her head. Every time she brought up appeal strategies, he shook his head. I just need to see him, he finally said one day. Luke, just once. She blinked. You want? He's not just a dog, Michael said, voice low. He's the only one who might still believe me. She didn't argue. She just made a note in her folder, eyebrows furrowed. And so the request went out, a formal petition to allow a one-time visitation from his retired canine. It was laughed at, denied, then appealed, then mysteriously approved with a single condition: no touching. 10 minutes, under surveillance. A gesture of mercy, they called it. A final goodbye. When Michael walked into the visitation room, something inside him clicked into place. He hadn't seen daylight without bars in weeks. The room smelled of bleach and old metal. But then the door opened, and in stepped Luke, held by a young officer who barely knew how to hold the leash. Luke stopped. His body stiffened. The handler gave a sharp tug. Come, lace boy. But Luke didn't move. His nose twitched once, then again, and then, like lightning, his eyes locked onto Michael. He moved. Not rushed, not slow, just deliberate. Every step like he was measuring something only he could smell. Michael dropped to one knee. Instinct. Muscle memory. He didn't speak, just looked at him. Luke stopped inches away. Then something strange happened. He sniffed, low, then higher. Then his head turned. His teeth bared, not at Michael, but at something on him. And then he lunged, not at his face, not at his neck, but at his chest. His jacket, with precision, with training, a motion Michael had seen dozens of times when Luke identified a target, a weapon, a threat. Everyone, and the room froze. One guard reached for his taser. "Get the dog." But Michael didn't flinch. He raised his arms slightly. "He's found something." A sharp rip of fabric echoed as Luke bit through the seam and something small, metallic, dropped onto the floor. It clinked against the tile. Silence. The handler stepped forward. "What the hell is that?" "A listening device." Michael stared at it, numb. Luke sat calm again, tail wagging slowly now. The language between them returned in full force. Luke had never failed to detect hidden threats. And now, even after weeks apart, he did it again. "He was that sewn into his uniform?" someone asked. No one answered. The camera kept recording. The room was colder than it needed to be. A square space of polished concrete and walls too clean to feel human. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a low-grade threat, and two guards stood near the door with the stiffness of men who didn't blink unless ordered. Michael Carter sat alone at the center of the table, shackled to the chair by his ankles, his wrists free only because protocol required it for visitation. He hadn't spoken in days, not since the last court motion was denied, not since the idea of hope became a thing you had to fake for the benefit of others. But today, he was different. Something beneath his eyes, behind the exhaustion, had begun to flicker again. It wasn't joy. It was purpose. The approval came through that morning. A single visitation with his former K-9 partner, Luke. 3 minutes only. Under surveillance. No physical contact. The judge's signature had come with a printed note attached. "Closure is not a right but a privilege. This is your closure." Michael had read it twice and folded it into a square he now kept in his breast pocket like a quiet insult. The minutes before the visit felt longer than the 6 weeks he'd spent locked up, somewhere between disbelief and resignation. He'd stopped counting time in hours and instead counted in instinct. The number of steps it took from his cell to the hallway, the shift in air pressure when a door opened, the sound of boot soles echoing on tile. He recognized the click of Luke's nails before the door even opened. That sound had been with him longer than any human voice. The door creaked open. Luke entered with his new handler, a young officer whose hand gripped the leash too tightly, not out of control but out of fear. Luke's posture was rigid, not from aggression but from restraint. He scanned the room once, nose twitching, ears up, and stopped moving the second his eyes found Michael. In that instant, the room evaporated. No more guards, no more chains, just that look, a stare filled with recognition, confusion, and something else. Duty. The handler gave a slight tug. "Go on, boy." Luke didn't need the command. He moved forward, slow but sure, like something ancient was driving his muscles. Michael didn't stand. He couldn't. His knees wouldn't have obeyed him even if he tried. Instead, he simply nodded once. A silent call only Luke would understand. And Luke answered, not with a bark, not with a tail wag, but with the kind of movement that defied protocol. With surgical precision, Luke crossed the final feet between them and suddenly rose on his hind legs. His front paws landed squarely on Michael's chest. One of the guards reached for his holster. The handler gasped, but Michael didn't flinch. "Wait," he said, voice calm but laced with something electric. "He's trying to..." It hit the concrete floor with a metallic clink, bounced once, then rolled in a perfect arc toward the wall. A small silver device no bigger than a thumb drive glinted under the light. The room froze. "What the hell is that?" one guard asked, stepping forward but hesitant to pick it up. Luke didn't move. He simply stood beside Michael now, head lowered, body poised like he had just completed a mission, and in many ways he had. Michael looked down at the torn flap in his shirt. The pocket had been sewn shut from the inside, something he hadn't noticed when it was first issued to him after transfer. He'd worn the same shirt for 6 weeks without knowing there was a listener hidden inside the seams. It made sense now, the unusually long intake process, the random assignments, the questions guards would ask that felt too targeted. Someone had been listening. Every word, every breath. One of the guards stepped forward and picked up the device with gloved hands. "It's a mic," he muttered, "miniature surveillance." He turned to the handler. "Did you know this was on him?" The young officer shook his head, speechless. "Not a chance. We clear inmates before visitation." He passed inspecting for that uniform. One guard asked, "Who issued it?" No one answered. Inside the glass, a supervisor was already on the phone, voice hushed, eyes darting. Luke sat now, perfectly still, tail resting against the floor. He didn't look at Michael. He didn't have to. The connection between them hummed like a current. They had built it over years in fieldwork, raids, alleyways, and under fire. It didn't need words. Michael finally broke the silence. He's trained to detect anomalies, devices, residual scent of electronics. He knew it was. One of the guards scoffed. "You saying your dog just blew open a surveillance op?" Michael didn't answer. Luke did. A single low bark. Not aggressive, confirming, purposeful. A new officer entered, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning. "Time's up. That's the end of visitation." No one moved. Not the guards, not Michael, not Luke. "Sir," the officer repeated, "we have to clear the room." Still, no one moved. Not because they were ignoring the order, but because something had shifted. Tangibly. The entire room could feel it. The air felt denser. The silence had teeth. Michael slowly looked toward the glass, toward the camera that had been recording the entire encounter. His voice was low but razor sharp. "I want that footage sealed. That device, you know damn well I didn't put it there." The officer didn't reply. He clicked his pen once and turned to leave. Luke didn't move when the handler reached for the leash again. Instead, he looked at Michael, eyes narrowing just slightly. Then, for the briefest moment, he did something no one expected. He growled. Not at Michael, at the wall, a sound from deep in his chest aimed not at flesh but at intent. The kind of growl he used only when danger was still near but unseen. Michael followed his gaze, and for the first time, his eyes narrowed too. The silence that followed Luke's growl wasn't the kind of silence that comes from absence, but from restraint. Thick, waiting, heavy. Michael's gaze remained fixed on the wall where Luke had turned his attention. There was nothing visible there, just smooth gray concrete. But he had learned long ago to trust the dog's instincts over his own eyes. A slow breath escaped him, not of relief but preparation. One of the guards stepped forward cautiously, eyeing Luke as though the German Shepherd might suddenly tear through steel. The leash in the handler's hand trembled ever so slightly. Luke didn't move. He wasn't finished. Not yet. The device still lay on the floor near Michael's feet, untouched since the first guard picked it up and set it aside like it was just another piece of confiscated contraband. But this wasn't just another piece of tech. It wasn't even standard issue. The first thing Michael noticed, the material wasn't plastic or steel. It was composite, military-grade, matte-finished, no serial number. He leaned forward slightly, enough to see the micro-inscription hidden beneath the casing. It wasn't a number. It was a symbol, a crescent hooked around a single dot. His pulse quickened. "Here's your clearance level," he asked suddenly, not to the guards but to the man now standing behind the glass wall, the supervisor who had been silent until now. The man blinked as if startled that Michael even acknowledged him. "That uniform," Michael continued, nodding at the shirt still ripped open across his chest, "was issued to me 6 weeks ago. I've worn it almost daily, and nobody, not one officer, not one intake tech." One of the younger officers, barely into his 20s, had his phone in hand. His thumb hovered over the camera app. Michael saw him angle the lens just enough to capture the device before anyone noticed. But someone did. A voice, sharp and clipped, came from behind the glass. "Put the phone away." The young man hesitated. Then again, "Officer Ramirez." I said, "Put the phone away." Ramirez flinched like he'd been slapped. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the device. His superior didn't need to raise his voice a third time. Everyone felt the power shift in the room. Michael watched it all unfold, expression unreadable. He knew that voice. Captain Holt, administrative overseer of inmate protocol, former internal affairs. Clean record, but that voice, it carried weight only a man with something to protect could wield so easily. Luke's growl returned, lower now, rumbling like thunder behind stone. The supervisor narrowed his eyes. The visit's over. Clear the... But no one moved, not right away. It was Ramirez who finally broke the tension. Sir, shouldn't we log the device, tag it? This isn't standard. It wasn't declared. We need to... I said, Holt repeated, stepping forward so his image loomed larger behind the glass. Clear the room. Another guard reached out and grabbed Ramirez by the elbow, pulling him back with a whisper only Michael could hear. Pick your battles, kid. Ramirez looked at Michael. Just a glance. But in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition. Not of guilt, of design. Michael offered the faintest nod. Ramirez lowered his head and stepped back. Michael leaned slowly to the side and picked up the small device between his fingers. He held it up to the light, rotating it gently, almost reverently. This, he said, isn't a listening device. Holt froze. Michael tilted the thing just enough to catch a barely visible red diode blinking behind the casing. It's active. He stood, ignoring the warnings of the guards. This wasn't used to monitor me. He turned toward the wall again. It's still transmitting. That changed everything. The air went tight, the cameras recorded, the guards tensed. Luke stood, not wagging, not posturing, but protecting. One of the techs entered the room suddenly, called in on short notice. We've got an outbound signal, the man confirmed, eyes on a handheld scanner. Encrypted, it's piggybacking off the building's security Wi-Fi. Shut it down, Holt barked. Already on it, the tech replied, typing furiously. But whoever's receiving this, they're off. Get no IP, no trace. Michael smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a warm smile. It was cold. Calculating. That device wasn't planted to record me, he said. It was planted to see if I'd say something. Someone expected me to crack, to confess. But I didn't. So they left it to rot. He placed the device gently on the table. But Luke didn't forget. He remembered the scent, the signal, the pattern. Holt took a step toward the door but paused. His face had shifted, even if subtly, like a mask slipping just for a second. Michael saw it. Luke did too. The dog's body leaned ever so slightly forward, muscles coiled, and then Ramirez from the back of the room spoke up again. Why would someone bug a man they already convicted? The question hung in the air. It didn't belong to just him. It belonged to everyone now. No one answered, because the answer was worse than silence, and Michael could feel it. They hadn't finished with him. His conviction hadn't been the goal. It was the cover. Luke shifted again, the tail no longer still, the ears turned. Michael's jaw clenched. He didn't blink. Someone still listening. Luke's barking sharpened, no longer rhythmic but piercing, like a fire alarm that no one could shut off. His focus hadn't shifted for a second. His eyes stayed locked on the interrogation room wall, the one opposite the one-way mirror where no door existed and nothing. When something lethal was coming, and Luke sensed it seconds before any human ever could. And now, inside this cold concrete room surrounded by cameras and armed men, Luke was barking like death itself had stepped into the space. In the observation room behind the glass, a technician adjusted the gain on the wall-mounted receiver that connected to the old security mics embedded within the building's infrastructure. Most were non-functional, leftovers from a prior era when everything was over-surveilled and under-recorded. But now, one of them was picking up static, faint, male, caught mid-sentence. He's compromised, clean it up, just finish him off. The room froze. The technician's hands hovered above the console. The words had been crystal clear. No codes, no encryption, just a direct command to eliminate someone. And the someone was obvious. Michael didn't hear the voice, but he felt the shift. The air changed, the barking intensified, the glances exchanged between guards grew tighter, more calculated. Luke's ears flattened against his head. He lunged at the wall, scratching, teeth bared, as though he could break through the concrete and drag the truth into the open. Holt stepped forward, speaking into the comms. Clear the room, remove the prisoner immediately. Where are we going? Michael demanded, already rising. Two guards approached fast, each gripping an arm. Isolation, one of them said, avoiding eye contact. Security protocol. Bullshit, Michael muttered, but he didn't resist. Behind the glass, another figure stepped in. Back in the room, Luke broke protocol. As Michael was pulled away, Luke yanked hard against the leash. The handler lost his footing. Luke scrambled forward, barking with a desperation that went beyond instinct. The hallway they were taking wasn't familiar. It didn't lead toward the regular cell blocks or transfer units. It was the back hallway, used for staff or emergency extractions. The moment hung heavy. Luke barked again. One word echoed inside Michael's mind, unspoken but clear. Ramirez, standing just beyond the door, watched the transfer. His face was pale. He had heard the voice too. He didn't understand the language, but tone didn't need translation. Someone had just given the order to remove a man under custody, permanently. Ramirez turned, walked briskly down the hall, and disappeared into a restricted zone. Michael said nothing as he was escorted away, but in his gut something coiled. His instinct had always been reliable, and right now every nerve in his body was screaming the same thing. This wasn't protocol. This was a hit. And Luke, his partner, his shadow, had sensed it first. The hallway twisted into silence. Michael's boots dragged slightly with every forced step, but not from fatigue, from calculation. He memorized every turn, every creak of the floor, every angle of every camera that didn't blink or follow, which meant one thing: they weren't being monitored through the official grid. The guards said nothing. The one on his left gripped his elbow harder than necessary, as if convinced silence would make him invisible. The one on the right kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched, breathing shallow. Michael knew that breathing, it was the kind that came before a man pulled a trigger. Behind them, the buzz of the sealed door faded, and Luke's last bark still echoed in the corners of Michael's mind. Somewhere, not far, someone was already preparing to clean up the fallout. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't calculate, was that Michael Carter had stopped being afraid the moment Luke found that listening device. Fear was a tool. Now he was using it. In the admin tower above the West Wing, Agent Naomi Griggs stared at her terminal in disbelief. She wasn't part of corrections or internal affairs, but Homeland. Her assignment had been long dormant, just a skeleton key tapped into the prison's surveillance grid for a case she had nearly closed months ago, until one of the old listening nodes sparked a ghost ping, a device that should have been decommissioned, a feed that wasn't authorized. Curious, she dug deeper. What she found wasn't just audio. It was a layered archive file, encrypted but poorly. Someone had been sloppy. She played the first clip, static, then voices, clear, recognizable. The first was a man for short, confident compassion, the kind of cadence bred from a lifetime in politics. "We can't afford for this to go public," the voice said. "Then give him an option," came the reply. A woman's voice, calm, efficient, professional. "Cut a deal, pressure him, make him think he's doing the smart thing." The file timestamp, 3 months before the verdict. The meeting had taken place in a government conference room. One of the speakers was Councilman Wade Hargrove. The other, Griggs froze the wavefront and matched the voice print, was Dana Lowell, Michael Carter's court-appointed attorney. Michael had trusted her. She had come in wide-eyed, idealistic, selling herself as someone who still believed in justice. She had been the one to tell him the evidence was stacked, that the jury would never believe his story, that accepting a deal, even pleading guilty to a lesser charge, would spare him a life sentence. And Michael, already shattered by betrayal, had nearly considered it. Until the trial proceeded without the deal and she stopped answering calls. Griggs leaned back in her chair, bile rising in her throat. She recognized the setup now. Michael wasn't just framed. Meanwhile, Michael was escorted into a holding chamber he didn't recognize. It wasn't listed on the blueprints. It had no ID code on the door. The walls were padded, not to prevent violence but to muffle sound. No one explained anything. No one unshackled him. They just locked the door and left him alone under a single humming bulb. He counted seconds. When it reached 63, the vent overhead air pressure changed. The lock clicked, not from the outside but from within the door frame itself. A silent code. Michael stepped back. Then, it opened. The woman who entered didn't wear a badge. She wore a suit, slim, dark, tailored. Her shoes didn't make a sound. She closed the door behind her and stood with one hand in her coat pocket, the other holding a file. "Mr. Carter," she said with clinical formality, "you've become complicated." Michael didn't move. He watched her eyes, not for threat, for hierarchy. She wasn't just internal, she was above it. "Is that a new charge?" he asked. "Complication?" "Not yet," she replied. She set the file on the table and pushed it toward him. "That's you, your records. But not the ones you've seen, the originals. Pre-trial documentation, call logs, metadata." He didn't open it. She raised her eyebrow. "Inside is a transcript of a conversation between your lawyer and a member of the oversight committee. She was instructed to build your case around guilt, make it palatable. Your cooperation wasn't just encouraged, it was engineered." Michael finally sat down. "Why are you telling me this?" She hesitated for the first time. "Because someone made a mistake. Your dog exposed a breach. That wasn't supposed to happen. And now there's a trail, one that leads straight to people I work with." "And you want what, my silence?" he said. "No," she replied. "I want the same thing you do, the truth. But if you don't play this smart, we both disappear." Michael opened the file. Inside were pages of emails, internal memos, even a voice transcription with the initials DL and WH tagged beside each sentence. It wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. Someone had chosen him for this, and someone else had helped them build the lie. Somewhere in the prison's basement, Luke was locked in an impound cell, pacing, ears twitching, and Ramirez, now in the archive server room, was watching a second clip. The one no one had meant to leave behind. The file in Michael's hands felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of the layers it pulled back from memory. Names that once seemed incidental now carried the stink of conspiracy. He turned to the second-to-last page, a printout of a server access log. The user ID was familiar. Michael stared at the timestamp. It was 6 weeks before his trial. The note beside the record simply said, "Unauthorized access sealed file." Below that line was a single redacted note. "Missing, case closed." Michael's stomach clenched. He remembered Ramos, barely 20, polite, nervous, the kind of intern who brought extra pens to briefings and stayed late even when no one noticed. Ramos had been assigned to cold case review, but had asked, politely, shyly, if he could shadow Michael during 2 ride-alongs. Michael had said yes. It had seemed harmless. Until now. Naomi Griggs stood quietly on the other side of the table, watching him make the connection. "He was the first," she said, "the first one to dig into your arrest and realize the evidence tree had gaps." Michael didn't speak. "He pulled sealed footage from the precinct camera network," she continued. "Footage that showed the weapon used in your case was logged into evidence 36 hours before the murder took place. He brought it to his supervisor. That was his mistake." Michael exhaled slow. "What happened to him?" "The report says he went AWOL, quit the program, packed up and disappeared." "And what really happened?" Naomi hesitated. "We don't know. Not officially. But his last login pinged from a secure node inside the division's internal archive." She handed Michael another document, thinner and stamped confidential security access only. It was a network trace. Someone had wiped Ramos's credentials an hour after he accessed the file. All that remained was a ghost ping, bouncing between proxy servers in DC, then silence. Michael leaned back in his chair. Someone buried him. Naomi nodded, and then buried everything he saw. But there was another page, another connection. Michael flipped it over. The name on the next line made him pause. "Ramos, Chief of Internal Systems Security." Michael read it again, slower. "His brother?" "Yes," Naomi said. "He doesn't talk about it. His personnel file omits the relationship. Paperwork was scrubbed. We only caught it through blood type matching during routine clearance checks. He never knew Eric was working your case. Until now, until 5 days ago," Naomi said. "Javier Ramos flagged multiple anomalies in the prison's data logs. Timestamps misaligned, visitor records missing, evidence locker entries with identical digital signatures." She paused. "He reported it, then he went silent." Michael stood up. The guards outside didn't move. Naomi didn't stop him. "Where is he?" he asked. Off-Gib, she said, disappeared 3 days ago. Last trace was from a municipal node near the city records vault. Then nothing. Michael nodded. He found something. Yes, Naomi said. And now you need to find him. Michael turned, pacing. Why me? Because he'll run from law enforcement, she said. He doesn't trust the system anymore. But he might trust someone they tried to destroy the same way they destroyed his brother. In a different part of the facility, Luke lay silent in a metal cage. His ears twitched, reacting to footsteps from 2 floors above. Too faint for humans, but not for him. The hallway beyond buzzed with movement, but no one approached his cell. The guard rotation had changed. They weren't feeding him. But Luke wasn't concerned with hunger. He was listening, tracking. Every scent, every vibration, every voice. Then, faint and distant, he heard it. A voice he recognized. It wasn't Michael, it was younger. Nervous, urgent. I didn't know it was your case, I swear, they said it was archived. A pause. If I send this, I'm dead, you understand that, right? Luke's ears perked. The voice was coming from a duct shaft 20 feet away. Another voice responded, lower, more measured. You send it anyway. A click, a whir. Data transferring, the voice continued. They're cleaning house. I've seen the files they're prepping to purge. They've marked him as disposable. Then, silence. Luke stared at the grate. Still, focused. Then he stood. Meanwhile, Ramirez stood inside the server vault on level 3, staring at the blinking cursor on the upload field. The file he'd copied from Naomi's unsecured briefing room was loaded. Audio, visual, metadata, all pointing to a years-long operation to scapegoat a decorated officer for a crime with political roots. But he hesitated. The file wasn't enough. It needed context. And that's when he saw it. A digital signature embedded in the device log from the listening unit Luke had exposed. A signature that matched with another one buried in the system 3 months earlier. The user tag read, D-Law XTC Council. Dana Lowell again. Ramirez narrowed his eyes and pulled the thread. The signature led to a secondary log. Lowell's voice, crisp, casual. He doesn't know. He actually thinks this is a real defense. It's almost sad. A pause, laughter. A man responded. Let him plead out, less mess for us, tell him it's the smart move. He's not built for prison. Ramirez froze. The file metadata matched the date of Michael's final case meeting. It had been recorded for deletion. The only reason it existed was because Ramos, the intern, had flagged it before disappearing. And now Ramirez had the last copy. The server room lights flickered as Ramirez encrypted the files he had uncovered and began duplicating them to a secure drive. His pulse thudded behind his ears, but his focus didn't waver. There wasn't time for fear. Every layer he peeled back revealed another fracture in the system that had once promised justice. But it wasn't until he stumbled into the department's external animal operations archive that he realized just how deep the rot ran. He hadn't meant to access the K9 database. He was tracing digital footprints tied to surveillance systems, looking for where the audio feeds from Michael's interrogation had cross-linked, but an anomaly flagged by a misrouted access token led him somewhere else. Luke's profile tag, L2319, unit classification, urban narcotics/combat assist. That part he expected. What he didn't expect was the blackout period in the metadata. 3 months. Completely frozen. No handler notes, no vet visits, no GPS logs. The window aligned precisely with the time frame of Michael's arrest and initial isolation. It was as if Luke had been benched the moment Michael was framed. Not reassigned, not retired. Just Ramirez drilled into the logs, finding an entry redacted by contracted medical entity, clearance level red. That designation was almost never used in K9 programs unless the dog had been loaned out to external ops, private sector, federal agencies, or something blacklisted. He didn't need a badge to know what it meant. Luke had been taken by someone outside the department, and no one had ever bothered to mention it. He leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowing on the vet ID tagged next to the entry. Dr. B. Harrow. Unregistered. No matching license in the federal veterinary system. Whatever had been done to Luke had been done off-book. At the same time, Naomi Griggs was speaking with a former tech from Tactical Comms, who had quietly resigned 6 months earlier after a whistleblower tip landed too close to his desk. The man met her in a parking structure 3 blocks from the precinct, eyes darting with every sentence. "You don't get it," he told her. "Those dogs are built like hardware. They're upgraded constantly. Sensors, signal readers, scent recognition." Naomi didn't flinch. "You're saying Luke was modified?" "Not officially. But unofficial doesn't mean impossible." He pulled a faded folder from his jacket and handed it over. "I wasn't supposed to keep this, but I knew one day someone would come asking. Your boy? Lel 2319. He had a surgical appointment flagged under a task force called Sentinel Drop. That's above military clearance." "And where?" Naomi asked. He tapped his own neck just below the ear. "Subdermal, beneath the muscle. Left side. You wouldn't even see it unless you knew exactly what you were looking for." Back in the facility, Michael paced the edges of his temporary holding room, waiting for a signal, any signal, that something was moving. He didn't expect to be rescued. That part of him had died in the courtroom, but his instincts told him the clock had shifted. Someone was panicking, and panic always made mistakes. A buzz came from the wall speaker. Michael stepped toward it, listening. It clicked again, Morse code. Not fast, not clean, but deliberate. He counted the pattern. Short, long, short, the letters spelled L. The dog had been trained to communicate silently in scenarios where vocal barks would compromise the mission. He was trained to tap out directional codes. 3 scratches for safe, 2 for danger, and repeated singles for I'm here. Michael pressed back once, then waited. On the other side of the complex, Luke had maneuvered his way behind the waste disposal chute of the K9 maintenance wing. The cell they'd caged him in wasn't designed for retention. It was designed for storage. But they'd underestimated him. He pressed the back of his neck against the corner wall, curling just slightly, until the scar behind his left ear pressed into the low seeker plate embedded there. He felt the resonance, barely a hum. Elsewhere in the compound, a security node blinked to life. Ramirez saw it first, an active ping from an internal dog eye system that had been marked inactive. Luke's signal, coming not from holding but from sublevel C, a maintenance corridor no one used anymore. The signal contained data packets, encrypted audio fragments. Ramirez ran the decrypt. What came through chilled him. A recording, voices he recognized. Dana Lowell, Councilman Hargrove, Holt, all of them in the same room. The same voices he had heard in Naomi's file. But this wasn't a transcript. This was a recording. Live. Real. Captured not by any surveillance device but by a dog. Luke had recorded them. And now that signal had been triggered. Ramirez stood, heart pounding. He wasn't just trained to detect threats. He whispered to himself. He was wired to expose them. Luke had always remembered in scent. To him, time wasn't measured in days or hours, but in layers of smells, patterns of motion, frequencies of breath. And in his memory, the warehouse at Dock 47 still reeked of betrayal. That was where it had happened, but there had been something else too. Something buried in the dirt under broken pallets and rusted steel beams. Something he hadn't understood at the time. A fragment of metal, small and buzzing, coated in the faint scent of gunpowder and electrical burn. He had sniffed it once, growled and nudged it under a splintered beam before the crime scene techs arrived. No one saw, no one asked. Luke had simply obeyed Michael's command to stand down. That moment had never left him. Now, weeks later, Ramirez and Naomi stood side by side in the van parked just outside the warehouse perimeter. Luke sat in the back, calm, alert, eyes locked on the building like it had never left his mind. Naomi opened the cage and Luke leapt down silently, not waiting for direction. He didn't need a leash, he didn't need a word. He bolted across the lot, paws gliding across cracked asphalt, heading straight for the western corner where the scaffolding had once collapsed. Naomi followed close behind while Ramirez kept his hand on the scanner slung over his shoulder, sweeping for buried signals. Luke stopped suddenly, nose pressed to the dirt, tail rigid. He barked once, sharp, then began to dig. Naomi dropped to her knees as Luke clawed deeper, sending up clouds of gravel and grit. After only 30 seconds, his paw scraped metal. He paused, then leaned in and gently pulled a piece of something from the earth with his teeth. It looked like a broken casing. The screen flashed once. Then, audio began to play. The first few seconds were muffled. Then came a voice, low, impatient. "He doesn't know, you understand me? He wasn't supposed to know." Another voice, clearer, female, firm. "We had to use someone, he was clean, it made the setup believable, he's just a placeholder until we clean out the rest." Then the first voice again. "Then we bury him quietly. We just need the headlines, after that, he's done." Naomi's breath caught. She glanced at Ramirez. "Do we have timestamps?" "Yeah," he said. "This was recorded the night before the arrest. Same coordinates, same room. Which means Luke picked it up during the raid and buried it like evidence." Ramirez finished. He remembered. Naomi looked at Luke, who now sat calmly next to the disturbed soil, tongue out, gaze steady. He didn't even know what it was, but he protected it. Ramirez shook his head slowly. "That recorder, it's not just an audio file, it's a death sentence. For them, and possibly for Michael," Naomi added. "If they find out it still exists." She stood quickly, already grabbing her phone. "We get this to the DOJ, now." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't that simple. Back inside the secure compound, Michael sat in a different room now, one less observed, less structured. It was the kind of place where silence meant decisions had already been made. The overhead lights flickered twice, then steadied. Across the table sat a man he didn't recognize. Clean suit, clipped nails, the kind of face that belonged to nameless departments. "Mr. Carter," the man said without expression, "you've received new developments in your case." "Define developments," Michael said. "Audio recordings," the man replied. "Old, damage, inconclusive, but real," Michael said. The man smiled faintly. "Real enough to cause—" Michael's eyes narrowed. "You're not here to clear me." "No," the man said. "We're here to offer resolution. You walk, sealed case, conditional immunity. In exchange for what? For silence, for compliance, for gratitude." Michael didn't move. "Or what?" The man leaned in slightly. "Or we let the machine keep hollowed. You get swallowed by it again." Outside the compound, Naomi's van pulled into a service tunnel not marked on any blueprint. Luke stood at the door, growling faintly. He could smell what was waiting. The courthouse was packed beyond fire code. Bodies shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the front like they were waiting not for justice but for a confession soaked in blood. Michael Carter stood at the defense table, flanked not by guards this time, but by Naomi Griggs and a newly appointed federal advocate, assigned by the Department of Justice after the audio evidence had been authenticated. The judge, older and sterner than the one who'd handed down his original sentence, scanned the room with the quiet authority of someone who knew this hearing was bigger than life. It hadn't been easy to get the motion for a retrial approved, but the broken chain of custody, the resurfaced surveillance footage, and most of all, the explosive audio Luke had recovered, had forced the judiciary's hand. Still, none of that prepared the court for what came next. The bailiff announced a special request from the defense. The court will now allow entrance of a non-human witness. Subject identification: K-9 Officer L2319, designation Luke. The room buzzed like a disturbed hive. People turned. Some chuckled. Some gasped. Michael remained still. The side door opened, and in walked Luke, flanked by two marshals, unchained, unbothered, his steps measured and deliberate. His coat shimmered under the courtroom lights, his body lean with tension, his eyes locked ahead as if he already knew who to find. The judge's brow furrowed, but said nothing. Naomi stood. "Your Honor, this animal is not here for theatrics. He's an active participant in the events under review. Furthermore, we believe he can provide behavioral corroboration." The judge nodded once. Luke was guided to the front, where a designated space near the witness stand had been cleared. He sat, eyes scanning the room, nostrils twitching, tail still. For several seconds he did nothing. The court waited. Naomi raised a hand and gently spoke. "Luke, focus." The dog turned his head slowly, then shifted his gaze to the gallery. And then it happened. His body stiffened, ears flattened. A low, sustained growl began to form in his throat. Not from fear, but from recognition. The kind of growl he only gave when confirming a hostile presence. Michael turned to follow his gaze. Luke wasn't looking at a random stranger. He was locked onto a man in the second row, seated calmly in uniform, silver bars gleaming on his collar. Deputy Commissioner Halford. Michael's heart stopped. He hadn't seen that face in years, not since overseas operations. Not since the day he was pulled off the active roster and reassigned stateside. Halford had been his unit commander, a man he had once trusted with his life, and now Luke. The judge slammed his gavel. "Control your animal," Naomi stepped forward. "He is in control, Your Honor. He's identifying a threat, just as he was trained to do under oath, under fire, and under the flag." "That's outrageous," a voice snapped from the gallery. Halford stood, face taut, eyes cold. "This is a disgrace to the uniform." "Is it?" Naomi asked, spinning. "Because the uniform you wear hides the voice in this recording." She pressed a button. The courtroom filled with familiar sound. Halford's voice, unfiltered, undeniable. "We just need the headlines, after that he's done." Gasps echoed through the room. The judge's face paled. Luke continued to growl, now standing, muscles tensed like a soldier at the breach. Michael stepped forward, eyes on Halford. "You told me to trust you. You said the mission came first. You were the one who said truth only mattered after the objectives were met." Halford didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was a confession. Luke took a step forward, only to be gently stopped by Naomi. "He remembers," she said. "The scent, the voice, the fear. Luke never forgets." And neither would the court. The courtroom stood frozen as the last echoes of the recording faded, leaving only Luke's low growl lingering in the heavy silence. The judge, hands folded tightly on the bench, exhaled through his nose and looked down at the stack of documents that had arrived that morning. The gallery was still buzzing, but every breath held restraint, every movement burdened with a question none dared to ask out loud. What happens now? Michael Carter stood without shifting his weight, staring at the man who had once led his unit and now sat trembling under the weight of his own exposed voice. Luke remained by his side, standing as tall as ever, but silent now. Then the judge leaned forward. "This court, under directive from federal oversight and in agreement with the Department of Justice, hereby vacates all charges against Michael Carter," she announced. "Effective immediately, his record shall be expunged. The charges were constructed, not substantiated. The evidence fabricated, not discovered. And the motive, politically motivated." She paused before continuing. "However, due to the classified nature of the materials presented, this ruling, and all associated documentation, shall remain sealed under National Security Directive 213R. No press coverage, no public statement, no compensation package." She looked at Michael directly. "You're free, Mr. Carter, but you're not allowed to be heard." The room erupted into a chorus of confused whispers and angry murmurs. Naomi opened her mouth to protestate and Colosopy bias a firm grip on her arm from a black-suited agent already at her side. Michael didn't speak. He knew better than most that freedom and justice rarely walked in the same direction. His vindication was buried under the very system that once convicted him. He nodded once. That was all he could give, and all he would take. 2 days later, the air outside the Canine Rehabilitation Center smelled like fresh grass and overdue spring. Michael stood by the gate, hands in his pockets, as the handler brought Luke forward one final time. The dog walked slowly, not limping but cautiously. Michael crouched to one knee, holding back the urge to call out. Luke approached, his eyes locked onto Michael's face, and held. Then, without hesitation, he leaned in, pressing his head into Michael's chest. But there was something missing. No bark, no tail wag, no shift in ears to match sound. Michael whispered softly, "Hey buddy, I'm here." Luke didn't react. Michael repeated it louder. Nothing. Naomi had warned him, thoughtless, safer, gently, that the bite Luke took on the prison floor, the one that dislodged the jamming device, had come at a cost. The pulse frequency was too close to acoustic threshold. Luke could still see, still smell, still feel, but the frequency forever. Michael rested his head against Luke's and closed his eyes. "Does he know?" Naomi asked quietly from behind. Michael didn't turn around. "He knows I'm here, that's enough." Naomi nodded, stepping back. The sun set slowly behind them. casting long shadows across the field as Luke sat beside Michael, eyes forward, ears twitching out of instinct, not function. The dog who remembered everything could no longer hear the world, but he could still feel it, in the weight of Michael's presence, in the Sahai and in the certainty that he had done what no one else could. Michael stood and walked toward the horizon. Luke followed, one step behind. They didn't look back. Because the ones who survive betrayal don't need applause. They just need each other. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing to follow more cinematic tales like this one. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the courtroom twist, or Luke's silent return to Michael's side? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts and your city in the comments.